This is Small Business Big World, our weekly podcast prepared by the team at Paper Trails. Owning and running a small business is hard. Each week, we'll dive into the challenges, headaches, trends, fun, and excitement of running a small business. After all, small businesses are the heartbeat of America, and our team is here to keep them beating. Welcome to Small Business Big World, our weekly podcast, where we talk about all things small business, the fun, the excitement, and today we're going to talk about the paperwork, which is very exciting. Dawn Powell is my guest today, our HR consultant here at Paper Trails. Welcome, Dawn.
Hi, Chris.
Welcome back, right?
Yes.
Thank you for joining us. So today we are going to talk about PTO policies, paid time off, leave, all of that fun stuff, which is probably the number one question that we get asked here at Paper Trails is about all of that exciting stuff. But before we get into that, don't forget, please like, follow, share, rate, review. Wherever you get your podcasts, a review and a rating would be really helpful. And certainly don't forget to subscribe so you can get us right in your inbox every week. We are available on all the podcast platforms, all the social platforms. And if you ever have questions for us or any of our guests, you can certainly reach out to us at podcast@papertrails.com and we will get answers to your questions. So, Dawn, PTO.
Yes. Yes.
So
Hot topic.
So this is probably the number one question that we get asked here in the office by our clients is, what do I need to do for PTO? Why do I have to have PTO? How do I do PTO? What do I, all those kind of things. How do I keep track of it? We always tell people, start with a great foundation, make sure you have a good policy, right?
Yeah, a policy is really important. It may seem like it's a pretty easy, straightforward thing, but if you don't have a policy, when someone wants to either use their PTO or is ending their employment and you're trying to decide if it needs to be paid out or not, a good policy is really helpful in that case.
And we certainly see that, as you're developing policies with our clients that, they don't necessarily know what they want to do or how they want to do it. And certainly in some environments, operationally PTO is easier than others. We're in an office, it's a little easier for us to manage PTO than say in a restaurant, right? So everybody's policy is going to be a little bit different, which is really important when you're writing that policy, determining eligibility, figuring out how you're going to accrue, who's going to get time off, if it's going to roll over, it's going to pay out, all that kind of stuff, right?
Right. So one of the things that I see a lot is, people thinking that a policy is one size fits all. And so they'll go and just Google a PTO policy and think that, okay, well, this will fit. And really it doesn't for, specific industries for the reasons that you just mentioned.
Right. One of the questions we get asked a lot, or, we see people try to really micromanage their PTO, I would say. And sometimes that's in the forms of having different buckets, right? They may have vacation or sick or personal or PTO, or they call them all sorts of different things, right? What do you advise clients when you're, people are going through that?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's all time off. So for me, best practice is put it all into one bucket. And that way you're managing one bucket. You have one bucket of approvals, and you're not trying to micromanage, well, are they taking sick time or vacation time or personal time? It's all just time off, and it makes it a lot easier.
And in Maine, for example, we have requirements that you have to offer certain time off, right?
Right. So in Maine, we have the Maine Earned Paid Leave. And in a nutshell, what that is you have to provide 1 hour of paid time off for every 40 hours worked to a maximum of 40 hours each year.
Right. Now, there's nothing that says you can't go above and beyond that, right? You can offer as much as you want, but certainly, that is the minimum required that you have to give time off. And, we talked about those different buckets. In Maine, it can be used for anything, right? That earned paid leave can be used for sick, personal, bereavement, anything you want to do, it can be used for that, right?
Right, correct. Yep. You have to allow employees to use that time for any purpose.
Right. And, the state has said it has to be a reasonable request and timing, and they can't just come to you today and say, I'm taking today off, and expect to be paid for it, right?
Right. No, there are some guidelines around requesting the time off and around granting the time off. Certain industries are allowed to have blackout periods where unless it's in case of an emergency, you can not allow employees to take time off during your peak seasons and things like that.
Right, which is the importance of having a good policy, right?
Correct. All of that needs to be documented in a policy and outlined in your employee handbook.
Right, which employee handbooks are a whole different conversation.
That's another podcast.
We'll do another one. There we go. See, I'll get you back. So when you're looking at PTO, that policy, what should be in that policy, I guess?
Really, all the guidelines about how that policy is going to be accrued when it starts. So, for example, if your employees don't start accruing right away, or if you don't allow them to use the time off right away, that needs to be in your policy. A lot of companies don't allow employees to use their time off until they've met a 90-day probationary period or something like that. That needs to be documented. Blackout periods, if you're going to have those need to be documented. Increments of time that you're allowed to request. Are you going to allow employees to use a half an hour, a half a day? All of those things need to be outlined. And then, you need to document, at the end of employment, are you going to pay that out, or do they lose it if they haven't used it when they terminate employment? Do you allow rollover? How much rollover do you allow? All of those things need to be documented in your
And
policy.
a process for requesting and approving time off, right?
Correct.
That's important too, is, we always tell our clients, push that work down on your managers, right? Make them managing the calendar and schedules and so forth. But that's important. Who do you request time off from? What's that process look like?
Right. iSolved, which is the software that we use, has a great mechanism for requesting. There's a calendar that shows your team and what that looks like, who's out, who's in, that kind of thing. And, those things all come into play when you're approving time off. You don't want to approve time off for all of your employees, leaving you, to drive the ship by yourself.
Right. And we use that tool internally. And, even things like you can have a maximum number of people that can have that day off. Within the system, we set those rules, which is really helpful. I know to Michelle, when she's reviewing and approving time off, is okay, who's got time off, right, already, who's already been approved, and in certain situations, we've had to say, no, sorry, I can't give you that day off for whatever reason. And that's okay too, right?
Right. And another thing that you probably want to have in your policy is how you consider those approvals. Is it a first in, first approved, or, is it done on seniority, or, how is all of that done, and how do you decide who is allowed to have the time off and who might have to, push it down the road a little bit?
What about payouts? Are you seeing clients paying time off out?
So it's really important what you call your time off, whether you call it PTO, vacation, personal time. In the state of Maine, you are required to pay out any accrued vacation when an employee terminates. Now, if you call it PTO, that's not always the case according to your policy. That can vary.
And that's just it's a total loophole, right?
Yeah.
It's funny, when the state passed this law, they knew they were going in contradiction to their own earned paid leave law that says you don't have to pay out the earned paid leave, but now they've passed a policy that says if you had vacation, you have to pay it out upon termination. So there's, it's kind of crazy. And it's been that way for a couple of years. I'm surprised they haven't fixed it yet.
Yeah, I kind of expected them to go in and clarify that. But as of yet, if it's vacation, you have to pay it out. If it's PTO, it's according to your policy.
Right. It's crazy. But, that's government at work. And that's something new that we're seeing across the country, really, is this wave of legislation that really is subjecting employers to provide time off, whether it's some states just say you have to have sick time. Some states say it's the total earned leave, like what we have here in Maine. So it's, now we're seeing the paid family medical leave and all sorts of leave, and that's a whole different podcast too. But, we're seeing more and more and more, of those types of laws going into place, which is certainly impacting employers.
Right. And it does vary state by state, which, makes it really important. If you are operating in multiple states, your policy needs to address the rules and the legislation for each of the states and how that applies to the employees in those states.
One of the new things, it's, and some people call this a scam, but one of the new things that's out there is unlimited PTO, right? We do that here.
Right.
What are you seeing? How are you working with that with clients, and what considerations are people taking into account when they do that?
On the surface, unlimited PTO sounds fantastic, but it has to be managed. And you do that, through the blackout periods and, looking at the time off calendars and, making sure that you don't have your whole staff out on one day. But it really does give a lot of flexibility to employees, and it's a really good benefit and a good perk. A lot of companies haven't started adopting that yet.
it was big in like the tech companies. I think Google was the first to do
Right.
it, right? And
Right.
I'll say, we do unlimited PTO here, and one of the things about that, I tell people I hire professional, competent, responsible adults who I trust can get their work done and manage their lives at the same time. And it doesn't mean you get to go to Bora Bora for 8 weeks and expect me to pay you, but it does mean that I think you're responsible enough to take what time you need, and I'll continue to compensate you as long as your work's getting done, right? And if we have performance issues, then we have to deal with those, and we deal with that in a professional manner rather than some says, oh gosh, you hit your 5 PTO days for the year, we're done, you can't do anymore. Again, if you think you could take 7 and still get things taken care of and make sure the clients are happy and all that stuff, we're fine with that too. And that's been our policy, and certainly that doesn't work in every industry or every business.
No, I think a lot of like the seasonal industries and things like that, that probably would not be the best way for them to handle it. But for a year-round business, it's been great for me to have that flexibility and, not have to worry about sick days versus vacation days. And, just if I need some time off and I have my work caught up, I'm able to do that. And that's a really good perk for employees.
Yeah. I would, in building whatever policy you're going to come up with, I always tell clients, keep it simple, right? Don't overcomplicate it for you or for your employees. Cause you've seen nightmares, I'm sure, of policies that are to the nth degree of calculation and all that stuff, right?
Yes, that's why it's really important to put those parameters and guidelines around your policies. What you don't want is to have, 10 different buckets of time off and trying to figure out, what does this particular day off fall under? And, then you run into the cases where people have 10 sick days, but they've used all of their personal time. And, do you allow them to use a sick day? And if you do it for one, then you have to do it for all. Whereas if you just have that one bucket of PTO, it really simplifies.
Yeah, you say, listen, this is what this is what you have for time, and you manage it, right? That puts the onus on the employee more than anything.
Right.
I think one of the arguments that I hear from people is, oh, well, they're going to use all their PTO and then they're going to get sick and then not get paid. Well, I think that, again, puts the onus on the employee to manage their time, right? I mean, most of the time when people are giving PTO, they're giving adequate PTO to cover a potential illness or time off, things like that, right? That's
right. I mean, and, you're always going to have, extenuating circumstances. And that's where things like, FMLA or paid family leave or those kind of things come in, if you have an extended illness or, something like that. But, under normal circumstances, most companies' policies will include enough days for employees to be able to do what they need to do.
One of the things that we've seen a lot of our clients start doing is really putting short and long-term disability policies in place, which are relatively affordable and takes the onus off of the employer. It's a little bit of a safety net for the employer, because I know I would feel guilty if, God forbid, you got in a car accident, something terrible happened. I would feel responsible and that I would need to pay you for as long as, you needed to be out. And that's not great for me or for the business. And so, we've seen a lot of clients put that short-term disability policy. So after 10 days, the insurance picks it up, right? It's that safety net.
Right. And, that if you have a really good employee who, has something like that come up, it allows them to take off the time that they need and, get healthy and get back to a place where, they can come back to work and give 100%. And they still have a little bit of income replacement so that, they don't feel like they have to go and, work a part-time job somewhere or something like that.
Right. And, we're going to see many states are now taking over that role through their paid family leave programs. We're coming into that in Maine. Certainly there are many other states that have done that. New Hampshire's got a voluntary one. Massachusetts got one. And many states across the country
Right.
are doing that. So the states are taking that role of, after a certain number of days of illness or absence for whatever the case, certain scenarios in certain states. But, that is taking the risk off of the employer as well to carry the PTO forever, right? That's the...
Right. Yeah, no, it's definitely putting some limits around that. And I think you're going to see a couple of things. I think there's going to be some private short-term disability insurance that's going to come into play as these states start requiring this. And I think for some companies, the short-term disability will go away and they'll start offering a long-term disability policy that'll pick up after the state plans.
Yeah, lots and lots of changes in that marketplace, which is a
Yes.
whole different conversation.
Yes, more to come.
But I think just having that security as an employer is good, especially again for us. We have unlimited PTO, so it really makes it so that if for a maternity leave or something like that, it takes the onus off of me and the financial burden and the operational burden off of me to manage that. So that's always
Right.
something to think about when you're creating a policy as well. Just all the other levers and switches you can pull. So, what mistakes are you seeing businesses make with PTO?
One of the biggest things that I see is around carryover and businesses that are allowing employees to carry over. And pretty soon they have, 300 days of PTO. Number one, that's a liability on your balance sheet. And that carries over year to year. And number two, there is no possible way that an employee could take all of that time and, still get their work done. And so when that employee terminates, that's a huge liability at the end.
Yeah, the payout's huge. And that, I think we see fewer and fewer people doing that, but I would definitely say some of the older businesses have done that, and we see big balances.
Yes.
And someone says, oh, guess what? I'm going to retire and I get to get paid for the next 6 months into retirement or whatever.
Right. That's why it's really good to look at your carryover policies. And, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are years when, if you say you offer 3 weeks of PTO and somebody only takes 2 and you allow them to carry a week, a week is one thing. But when it gets up to, hundreds of days, that's a whole nother situation.
Yeah. I think the other thing that we see a lot of is people making exceptions to their policies, right?
Yes. Yes. Always a bad idea, because what you do for one employee, you need to do for all employees. Say you allow someone to, carry over an extra week for some reason, and you don't do it for another employee. Disgruntled employees can cost you a lot of money in various ways.
Sure. I think it does not mean, though, that when you hire someone and they negotiate an extra week of pay, that is okay, correct?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Going into a employment relationship, it is pretty standard for people to negotiate time off, and, really important to include that in the offer letter when you extend the offer to the employee. But that happens daily.
Right. And as long as it's documented and so forth, and that's HR is document
everything. If it's not documented, it didn't happen.
Right. So that's really important too. But certainly, I think every business is different. Every business's needs are different, of course, operationally. So, but going back to the basics, start with a good policy.
Right.
That's figure out what you want to be when you grow up and how you want to manage your PTO, and really get that policy straightened out. So, well, good. Well, we hit a lot of PTO talk today.
Yes.
Any other closing thoughts about PTO before we head out?
Just if you have questions, just remember to reach out to us. I have a kind of a questionnaire that I go through with clients to design their PTO policies, because like I said before, it is definitely not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Absolutely. And we deal with that every single day,
Yes.
getting those kind of squared away for clients.
Yes.
So, well, good. Well, Dawn, thank you so much for joining me again, and we'll have you back for more talk about some of those other things.
Yes.
Handbooks, right? That's
handbooks.
what we got to do. So, but good and again, remember, please like, follow, share, rate, review, subscribe, anywhere you get your podcasts. Please hang out with us so we can keep doing this and having fun. And again, if you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email us at podcast@papertrails.com. That's Small Business Big World for this week. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Small Business Big World. This podcast is a production of Paper Trails. We are a payroll and HR company based in Kennebunk, Maine, and we serve small and mid-sized businesses across New England and the country. If you found this podcast helpful, don't forget to follow us at Paper Trails Payroll across all social media platforms, and check us out at papertrails.com for more information. As a reminder, the views, opinions, and thoughts expressed are the hosts and guests alone. The material presented in this podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be considered legal or financial advice. By inviting this guest to our podcast, Paper Trails does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific individual, organization, product, or service.